Hello and welcome back to the Collin Cadmus Podcast. Today I'm joined by Colin Specter. Colin graduated from UC Santa Barbara and then started his career in event management, where he got a taste of sales, customer service, and leading over 100 employees for nearly 7 years. In 2012, Colin pivoted into medical sales and then landed his first B2B SaaS role in 2014 as an SDR at Namely. Quickly becoming the top SDR in the company, Colin received promotions to account executive, regional sales manager, and director of sales, where he helped grow the company from 100K to 70 million ARR. After Namely, Colin became the VP of Sales at Orum in 2019 and recently received a promotion to Senior Vice President of Revenue just 3 months ago. Like myself, Colin's career didn't start in B2B SaaS, but we seem to follow similar paths by stumbling our way into the industry and applying what we learned beforehand to move up quickly and start building and leading teams. In a world where average tenures are quite low for sales leaders, Colin has made beating the average look easy. So I'm excited to dive in and get his thoughts. Before we get started, if you're watching on YouTube, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and leave us a comment if you have any questions. If you're joining us from Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please drop us a review and let us know what you think of the episode. This stuff really helps to grow the audience. Without further ado, let's dive in and learn firsthand what Colin thinks has contributed to his success and get his thoughts on all that's changing in the world of B2B sales. Colin, thanks for joining me and welcome to the show.
Awesome. Colin, thanks for having me on the show. It's such a pleasure to be here, to connect with you live with the audience here. And I feel like you and I have been connected and on LinkedIn for years now. And I've been a fan from afar, tracking your journey at Aircall and just all your great content and lessons learned. And so excited to hopefully share some of my points of view and lessons with your audience as well here today. Looking forward to this.
Awesome. Likewise. Well, thank you so much for joining me. I've got, I have 8 questions here in total. I think we'll have time to get through all of them, but if not, that's okay. I've been following, for those who've been listening to the podcast over the last few episodes, I've been following somewhat of a trend here, getting people's thoughts on really a lot of the same topics. And I'm reaching out, like you said, I feel like I know you somewhat, right? It's a lot of these episodes have been reaching out to some folks who I kind of feel like I've been following for so long. And it's been like, well, how come we haven't spoken yet? So a lot of this is some of like, I feel like I know you, but I don't yet know you. So I'm excited to get your takes. I kind of think I might know what you'll say on some of these things, but really I have no idea. But I want to start with the sales quota attainment. I think this is sort of a good foundation for the conversation. I've done these in slightly different orders on different episodes, but I want to get your take here to build a foundation on these topics. Over the last, 10 or so years, however long it's been, quota attainment on average has been steadily declining. They say it's below 40% now. I don't know that we have really truly accurate numbers. I tend to think whenever we find aggregate data that the number they tell us is probably not as bad as it really is, because people don't always put their worst experiences into the data. Like if you lost your job in a couple months, probably not going on your LinkedIn. If you had a really embarrassing, stint on your resume, maybe you're not the person participating in these surveys and whatnot. So when I hear 40%, I tend to think probably it's maybe even worse, right? But I want to get your thoughts on that. Why do you think quota attainment has gone down so low? What do you think are the contributing factors to that across the industry? And then what have you done to sort of try to curb that problem at your own organizations?
Yeah, no, it's an interesting trend, Colin. And I think, the kind of efficiency of sales organizations has gone down as well, even with the rise of AI and all these kind of efficiency technologies. And I think if you look at the macro reason, you could argue is the cost of a dollar going up, right? High interest rate environment versus low interest rate environment, right? So in a high interest rate environment, your dollars sometimes might be better just sitting in a savings account versus being deployed as resourcing. And so the buying committees have become more robust. That's slowing down sales cycles. We've seen that and measured that across our customers and even internally. And then so you have more stakeholders involved. You've got more that needs to go into executing the sale. And I think because of that, if you haven't adjusted your capacity model to account for the fact that your reps, they still have more on their plate that they need to eat before they can grab more food, right? And so just like from a simple visualization, if this meal is taking me longer than it normally does to consume, I can't get to the next seconds or thirds, right? I can't get to that next account. And so when your mind space is on a deal, or in the past, maybe that deal took, 30 days and now it's taken 45 days to get done, those extra 15 days are an opportunity cost against the new deals you could be prospecting, right? So just kind of simple, like from a macro trend, looking at like the economics of like opportunity costs and the opportunity costs of time in this case and capacity, I think it's contributed. The other side of that coin is with the rise of AI and everything we're seeing from kind of a buying experience perspective is like buyers, they demand more of sellers and their vendors than ever before, right? It's, folks are getting used to kind of these bespoke selling experiences because, you can get them now. You can get custom landing pages and these deal rooms and this kind of unique journey. And so folks aren't rushing to make decisions and they're demanding more from our sellers than ever before. And so, to answer the other part of your question, right, you've got to rise to the occasion and you've got to provide a best ever experience. Like there's no kind of cheap calories or cheap ways to get deals done anymore. And it's a forcing function for sellers to get back to really caring, right? And really investing with their buyers and ruthlessly qualifying which buyers they're willing to invest their care and their time with. And so one of the big changes, I mean, not really a change, but just more discipline and kind of rigor we've gotten around is ruthlessly qualifying like who we invest our time with, right? Because the opportunity cost is so high, right? If the sales cycle is elongated from 30 to 50, 45 days or, 60 days to, 70 or 80 days, you got to really focus your energy on the right accounts. Because the opportunity cost has become so high, your risk now, if you miss a deal, you have less time to make it up because your capacity has gone down. So happy to double click there on some of the ways, we think about qualifying and all that and just kind of my philosophy there. But, just at a high level, that's one of the reasons I'm seeing or have seen folks start to slip. They didn't adjust their playbook with the change. And I feel like there's change happening every season now. You got to keep a pulse on. So
this is great. And it's a little bit of a change from what I'm generally hearing, but it aligns really well with the real data. And so I think what you've done effectively here is you've seemed to do a good job at removing the emotions and seeing the problem quite clearly, because even myself have been guilty of just going straight into, well, the quotas are too high, so of course everyone's going to miss them. But you got a little bit beneath the surface there quite a bit, and diving into the longer sales cycles, buyer hesitation. That's what I'm seeing come out in the Salesforce report, right? I forget what they call their big assessment when they sort of released, I'm drawing a blank on the name, but
sales. Yeah.
Right. It was like the state of sales. Right. Correct. So they had a lot of data in there that actually spoke to everything that you just said, that buyer hesitancy is up, more stakeholders in the process, longer process. And people are just, I think it's an element of like, people are just becoming better buyers, right? They're becoming more skeptical. They have more experience going through these processes, and they've been burned probably a bunch of times. Almost probably all of the decision makers out there have made some mistakes purchasing SaaS at this stage of the game, I would think. And so they're going to be more skeptical when you add in, of course, the financial realm of all of that, right? That we're just essentially in a world where people are mostly cutting back, and you mix all that together, I think you get really where you're at. And I mean, we could go into the quota piece and all of that, but I actually think the quota is a bit more downstream, right? I think it's reactive, is like people try to sort of make up for these problems by jacking quotas up. And so it's not really the root cause of the problem. It's sort of the one thing that we notice, and often we stop there in trying to assess it. So I appreciate that. The next question sort of ties into this, and it may be quite similar, if not the identical answers. So that's fine if it is. We can just breeze past it if you think it's generally the same reasoning. But the VP sales average tenure, and I got Mark Costaglow's thoughts on this on the last episode, which I really found interesting because he's got a much longer average tenure than I do, and so do you. And so I'm curious to get your thoughts, because on prior episodes, I got thoughts from folks who are sort of in the park of me of like maybe kind of just making or beating the average, but you guys have basically doubled it or more. What do you think's the secret sauce there? I mean, did you just find the right company? Was it right timing? Or do you think you're really doing something different there?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, Colin. And I think my original thesis going into SaaS and what one of my mentors had suggested to me is, go do 2-year runs at different companies and get your equity. And then that way you've got, more diversity in your kind of, portfolio. And I think what kept me beyond the 2 years, both at Namely and here at Orum, is like the company just evolved like season over season, that it felt like a new company each season, right? It didn't get stagnant. We've like, I've grown tremendously in just in terms of my repertoire and kind of management and leadership, and the product has evolved and the market has evolved. And it's been like, it feels like almost a new company almost every season, just at the stage. First of all, Namely went like on a crazy run from seed to Series D very quickly. Orum's similar trajectory, right? We went from bootstrap to Series B over the past 5 years. And so when you have that kind of growth and change and plus the market dynamics, it has felt like a completely different business each year, right? Like in the beginning, you're I'm an early stage builder. I've never worked at a big co. I'm very much like early SaaS builder. And like in the beginning, it's all about evangelizing the sale and evangelizing the product and finding those early customers. And then once you do, then you move to the early adopters and you kind of cross the chasm and your sale evolves to more of like a traditional sale of influencing decision criteria and champion building. Whereas in the beginning, it's just finding believers in, what you're representing and kind of creating budget out of nothing. And now I'd say like at Orum, very similar to Namely was HR payroll benefits. Orum, we're an AI calling platform for B2B sales teams. We've really crossed the chasm. Now it's like folks have an initiative, there's an evaluation, we're influencing decision criteria, building champions. And so you get to this more traditional sales motion, which in and of itself is a fun game to play. And the kinds of plays you can call in the field are different than what you were calling in the evangelist days of the business. And so, for that reason, like it kind of scratches my strategic and salespreneur itch, if you will. And plus, for the people here, I want to see a successful outcome for my team, for my people. I want to help my reps get rich and my people, hit that next milestone. And I feel like, jumping, from one ship to the next, like usually you would only do that if, first of all, like I feel like you've got maybe some challenges internally. And I feel like I've got great alignment with my team. It's not easy to get that politically internally with an executive leadership team, and grass isn't always greener, right? Like a hotter product, hotter market might look good on the outside, but Colin, right? Like building things with people, it's people that make the business at the end of the day. Like if you've got great people that you're aligned with, that you've recruited, that you've built up, like giving that up, you really got to reduce uncertainty and reduce risk of like wherever you might go next, right? Maybe it's like start your own company, or it's like, the people at the other business and how you work with them. And like, you really reduce your uncertainty there. Unless it's like OpenAI or NVIDIA or something, wild like that, but you never know until you get there sometime though.
Yeah. It's so interesting to hear you say that, because everything you essentially focused on, assuming I didn't miss something there, is focused on you not deciding to leave, right? And the reason I find that interesting is because I think most of us are not deciding to leave. Most of us are getting pushed out the door. We're getting told, something to the tune of like, we're ready for our next phase of growth. We need to bring in someone who has experience at that next level. Did you run into any of those conversations? Did you at any point, like, your resume is very clearly like you're getting promoted. You went from SDR all the way up to director, and then you made the move to VP. So I would imagine timing obviously was on your side in some of that, but were there scenarios or conversations where it was a question of like, should we bring someone in who knows how to do this, or can Colin grow into the role? Any advice there, or any examples of what you had to maybe deal with there, or was timing sort of on your side and obviously you were crushing it and filling the shoes, and did it just kind of work out that way?
No, I appreciate that. And I think, certainly conversations, I have a very transparent relationship with my CEO, and it's like, it's conversations around like, okay, does it make sense to bring someone in that has gone on the run, from 50 to 100 million in IPO and or like through an exit like that as the CRO, or surround myself with mentors that can upskill me, right? And do that. And part of me is like, well, it might be nice to get a little air cover, to bring someone else in and someone that, is inspiring and great. And I'm growth mindset. Like I learn from people, I learn from you, I learn from my reps, I learn from everyone. And I think advice for your listeners or other sales leaders looking to go on the run is you need to have a peer network. You need to have folks you can tap for advice. And, if I look at, I had the VP of sales title from day one, but in the beginning I was an SDR, and then I became an AE, and then I became a manager once I hired my first couple of AEs.
At Namely?
At Orum, both at Namely and at Namely, I had the actual titles, but, when I went to Orum,
okay, I thought I maybe misunderstood the okay.
Yeah, well, just when I went to Orum, I started with the VP of Sales title day one, but I mean I was the only closer here really, and so
Got it. So you were the founding VP essentially. or the
Exactly. And
founding
so
salesperson.
you build value into your title. And so you get to like shed the skin of like each level, right? And it's like, okay, now it's like, then I hit VP, like a real VP of sales, and I had a director with manager with reps, right? And now it's like, okay, now I'm running revenue. And now it's like, okay, I have a head of CS and I have a head of sales. Now, like kind of backfilling my VP of sales role is that next phase that we're working through right now. And so I think you need to kind of take each view as you get there. Like in the beginning, you're in the trenches and it's like hard to zoom out. And you got to create, like the advice, I guess I'm trying to make this actionable is like, you got to create space for yourself to zoom out and get perspective at each level of the org. And then realize like the hardest transition for me was, I think, going from that, like, I'm a manager for my reps to like that first, it's called like first team principles, like around, your executive leadership team becomes your team. And that's who you need to focus on aligning with and really investing in the relationships with. And like, yes, like, you want your sales culture to be positive and happy and everything, but it's like you're much more about your ELT, your executive leadership team as the first team, and then you're hiring managers to take care of and kind of backfill that perspective you had on taking care of your frontline people. So that was an interesting transition. I think of all the transitions going from rep to manager to director to VP, it's that like switching from like, I'm a member of the executive team, this is my team now, even though I have a sales title. That was probably the hardest transition.
Yeah, I remember actually having that was a big topic for us at Aircall. They actually had someone come in at some point, or it might have been when we hired a chief people officer or something. They did a big training on that exact topic of first team, because I think we were all unaware of that. We would sit in our executive meeting, but none of us really felt like that was our first team. We didn't really, for some reason, we hadn't never talked about it or even thought about it. But when you really sit down to think about it, like what team am I on? Am I in this executive team representing the sales team, or am I in this executive team and then I go to my sales team representing the executive team? And the reality is a bit of both, and you kind of need to know when to wear which hat. But it, like, really, your first team is the exec team. That is that is the team you're on. But I find that sometimes you don't always want to make it feel that way to your team in sales, right?
Sure.
There's a time and a place for that too. Like, you don't want to feel like just the boss who's talking down to the team. And so I've always tried to sort of skate between that line there. And maybe I've gone too far in the direction of building comfort with the team. I've always found value in that, and I've found that as way to drive people and whatnot. But I think it may have in certain instances made me seem like I wasn't putting the executive team first, even though that wasn't really the rationale behind it. It was more about building trust and respect and all that stuff. But that's a great topic. And I think it often probably is never discussed. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah. Like you said, you don't realize it unless someone primes you for it. Right. And it's not like your CPO, your chief people officer sounds like, look, it's like, they probably recognize, hey, like guys, like we're the team here. Right. Cause yeah, you're coming in with your kind of army behind you. And it's like, that's my team behind me. And I'm here to like defend and represent. Yeah. Wait, hold on a second. Like this is
and you need some of that. Here. I think you do need some of that, because otherwise you'll end 100%. Up walking out there with like, 3x quotas after every meeting or something. Gosh. So there's an element of representing that team. Yeah. But it 100%. Needs to come from the right place. It needs to be a balance. Yeah.
Your CFO is not your boss. Okay. Don't, and that's the other advice. Like, while this becomes first team, it's like, you can't let your head of finance dictate your quotas. It's a conversation, alignment, negotiation that needs to happen. And
yeah, I've always found when it comes to the CFO, if they're the first one to speak on a topic, it's usually not going to go very well. And someone suggested, I don't know if it was me, it might have been someone else. I don't think it was me, but someone was eventually like, hey, we love getting insight from the CFO, but maybe it's best to hold that for last, right? Because they tend to tell us all the reasons we can't do something, right? Whereas if we just decide on what's the best thing to do and then challenge the CFO to figure out how to make it possible, that seems to work a lot better. But they don't like that very much.
I'll throw VP of legal in that bucket as well. It's like, let's hear it. Let's, as a product team, as a go
probably even more so with legal.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. VP of legal weighs in first, like, can't do that. It's like, well, you just killed creativity here.
They kill everything. They kill everything. You can see it when it happens. They're always the ones who take like a beautiful contract and turn it into 4 pages of nonsense. Like,
oh my gosh.
Yeah. There's always stuff in there. And it's a balancing act, by the way,
our meetings as well internally.
I really think it helps. It's like, we need to decide what's the best thing to do for the customers and the team. And then we need to challenge legal and finance and operations to figure out how to make it happen. Right. And I think if you go that way, it's harder for them for sure, because they want to be like, well, that's going to be super complicated and we can't do this, and that. And it's like, no. If it's the right thing for the customer, you're going to figure out how to do it and maybe come back with a somewhere in the middle kind of proposal or something. But like, let's not just punt things off the table because it's going to be hard for you to put into a spreadsheet or something, right? So
100%.
yeah, I did find that made things easier because a lot of great ideas just get thrown out the door before they're even debated because of things like that. Yeah.
And I'm looking back and it's like, yeah, like I think it's this great advice you just shared. I wrote a note on it.
Cool. I can't take credit for it. I think someone else may have come up with that. I don't remember, to be honest, or I heard it.
We all learn from each other. Yeah.
I think I often am probably writing LinkedIn posts and I don't even remember who to give credit to some things. Like we got a subconscious thing that's going on there. But let's talk about growth at all cost. I don't know a lot about the details, but I'm pretty sure, namely, I mean, raised a ton of money. That was probably definitely a growth at all cost company. I assume Orum is as well, maybe not to the extreme. I mean, namely is probably a bold example of that, but also they had the market share to get after. Like there's a lot of good reasons to do that. And just to preface this, I don't think growth at all costs is necessarily innately a bad thing. I think there's a right place, a right scenario for it. It was certainly the playbook for most of SaaS over the last 10, 20 years, let's call it. But seems you've got some experience in there. So I want to get your thoughts. Do you see, because I'm hearing basically, a lot of people are saying growth at all costs is going away. I talked to Jocko Vanderkoy, who's got a big take on this, and that we're seeing sort of this new playbook sort of evolve, which I think is just a hyper efficient playbook. It's going to be probably a lot of automation, a lot of product led growth, a significant reduction in the amount of outbound salespeople and things like that. And so some people are sort of in the camp of saying like growth at all costs is gone. There's this new playbook being created. And maybe there's some companies that still have raised money to follow that playbook. And so they'll continue to do what they're doing, but it's not going to be a thing of the future. I tend to think it's sort of, we're going into two options now, whereas you've got all this stuff with automation, with AI, with product-led growth, with remote teams, all these things that sort of make it easy to do things in a new, more efficient way. But that doesn't necessarily give you the same horsepower as having 50 to 100 SDRs that can really get you through the door and, bring in that market share really quickly. And so I think we're evolving into these two different ways. One is going to be, we're going to raise and spend a ton of money like we've sort of historically been doing. And then I think we're giving birth to this new concept where you can maybe get away with not raising so much money and take things a bit of a more slow and steady approach. And maybe that's the right way for some companies. But just want to get your thoughts on that. Do you have any thoughts on that? Have you seen that happening with any of the companies you're working with or selling to? And do you think it's going in one direction or the other, or do you think it's splitting into both? Wherever you want to go with that topic.
Yeah, I think the mistake a lot of businesses made, and namely made this mistake, and it's a great lesson to impart, with the audience. If you're thinking about growth at all costs, you can do it if you have, I'd say 100, 120% NRR, and you're in a land grab. Like you want to, namely, we wanted to get as big as possible before like ADP innovated and we were disrupting like the ADPs, the Paychecks, Ultimate Software, Kronos, like these kind of legacy Workday, these kind of legacy HR payroll systems. And we wanted to capture as much market share as possible before they started to directly, compete with us with bigger, better resourcing. Right. And so
was namely, just refresh my memory. They're doing health insurance too. It's like a Zenefits, like a TriNet, or was just payroll?
Nailed it. Yeah,
it was all of it. Okay.
So that was the disruptor. Was the first mover in Zenefits. Similar, we were kind of the two going for all the market share. It was innovative at the time to connect your payroll, your benefits, your HR system, performance reviews, your recruiting in one place.
So before that, you had ADP and all these different.
Yes,
got it.
You had these like disparate systems that had different departments, kind of like sales and marketing, like not on the same CRM, imagine. And they would do CSV transfers and manual transfers every time you had a new hire or you had an employee change. We take for granted the fact that we have all these great systems of records now that were the second movers, the fast followers, like the Ripplings and JustWorks and the Gustos and everything else that you see these days. And ADP and Paychecks have come out with their own, at this point. And so at the time, though, it was quite innovative. It's like, oh my gosh, you're uniting these teams, as like one integrative system. And, I think namely the challenge we faced at that time was like sales and marketing was dialed in, but the product, like we had acquired different technologies to actually create that all-in-one experience. And so like everybody wanted it to sync the way it did, but it had some product limitations and, customers felt the pain of that. And so what we wound up experiencing was like a leaky bucket at namely, at that point in time. And so we had to like kind of 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And so, you'll burn through your cash much faster faster that way, right? Where I think had we like hardened those areas of the product earlier in the earlier days of that business, it may have justified continuing down the path of like, because if you like just a simple, thing is you got to get to your next valuation before the next round. Otherwise you have a down round and your stock is all underwater, right?
Yeah.
And so you got to get to the next valuation. So you constantly have to look at your runway of cash. How much cash do you have left in the bank? Can you sustain this growth at all costs? Maybe yes. I'd say yes if your retention rate is in the place where you're not having to now overcompensate for that sub 100% retention rate, or maybe in your original modeling, you modeled, we'd have 100% NRR. And then in the end, maybe if you had like 70% NRR, well, now you had to close 130% to make up for it, right? And so if you don't have, again, it's going back to like modeling and your capacity. If your model didn't change with your original thesis, it's the same with the quotas, right? If your model doesn't adjust with like what's actually happening fast enough, you could run out of cash, right? Or you run out of quota capacity, right? Similar thing here. So we learned a hard lesson at Namely, and we wound up getting acquired by PE. It wasn't like the level of outcome everyone dreamed, right? Like going IPO, ringing the bell, like we still had like an outcome. So I think if you have healthy retention metrics, keep injecting cash in if you're capturing, and then you'll get to a point where you focus on efficiency metrics, your CAC and your CAC payback, and then start to scale back maybe the SDR team and do like 3-to-1, 4-to-1 ratio, right? We had very rich ratios, 1-to-1 back then.
Yeah. I'm glad I asked that because you crushed it out of the park with that answer. I mean, I've been saying to people something similar, but it's becoming very obvious to me why you've been so successful. You have a very good way, or a very strong way to articulate what's happening. And so what I've said to people sort of is like, well, growth at all costs could make sense, if you have really strong product market fit and you need to get that product market, share, and you need to do it fast. And I've used actually Rippling as an example because they're in this space where it's insurance. So there's quite a bit of red tape probably for players to get involved in that space. You have to build relationships with the insurance companies. And so for that reason, like that's good. It makes it a little harder for competition to just come in the space. But I also think you just need to have a product that crushes it out of the park because to your point, and you just, by talking about NRR, such a better way to explain it, but the problems just compound later down the road, right? And that's essentially what you just articulated better than I have before. Because I always just say you just need to have a great product, but that's an objective or subjective thing to look at. Whereas when you say 120% NRR, you're basically saying like, look, if we've got a leaky pot, let's not just keep spending a ton of money to put more stuff in the bucket. Like, let's plug that leak first, right?
Exactly. Hold down on sales and marketing for a bit. Let's like default alive. Let's invest in our product, harden our product, work on the base. The base revenue, can we get it back to a healthy clip? Then reinvest, then double down, then release another product and compound the startup, or you have to pivot. Maybe you have to pivot.
Right.
But
right.
If you're like going in with, if you haven't changed from your original thesis, you could run out of cash, and then you have to go to a down round, and then your people are underwater, and it's so much harder to climb back up.
Yeah.
And you gotta go get PE money, and that's like, I don't know, you don't want to go do that if you're going for the VC path, basically.
Yeah, it makes so much sense. So let's move on to AI and sales. Let's get your thought on this. We can talk maybe particularly to outbound. I don't know if you want to talk about, an AI actual salesperson, I guess we could go down that road. I'm not sure that's going to actually happen, but I'm curious to get your thoughts. I mean, AI SDR is sort of the hot talk today. Are we going to get rid of our SDRs and just sort of automate all of this stuff? But then there's also the concept of like, will the full sales process just be automated with an AI sort of AE, so to speak? What are your thoughts on that? Are you guys implementing any AI today? Do you think that people are losing their jobs? Well, I'll let you run in any direction you want to on that topic.
Yeah, I think folks that were just doing kind of like basic manual data entry, basic data research, like AI can replace those jobs. I think even like maybe low performing SDRs, perhaps an AI is better at, like Sixth Sense has like an AI email, tool. And you could argue a lot of the SDRs that grew up in like the email cadencing world and never had to pick up the phone, like there's an AI SDR that can write better emails than you, right? Like, and who it's not replacing still are the great SDRs that are great copywriters and care and research and because the AI emails are still not like as good as someone that like can like, when you do an introduction about your guests, right? Like you're taking the time to like put some care into that and your own like authentic take on it. And the current state, and again, this is like the worst AI is ever going to be. AI is still not quite there. It makes mistakes. There's a great example on LinkedIn recently, like the AI,
it hallucinates. They call it a hallucination.
Hallucinate. Right? And somebody had like shared on their personal Facebook about like, the passing of like their uncle or something. And then like they posted on LinkedIn, the AI SDR wrote like, hey, our condolences in the passing of your uncle. Do you want to take a demo next Thursday? It's like, holy shit. Like, guy,
it's almost like it's got a little bit of that autism in there, right? The lack of, it's like the lack of understanding the emotion, the EQ behind
you nailed it. Yeah, the EQ is missing. And it's like, you can't replace a curious, caring salesperson with conviction, right? I say the triple C's. You got to have conviction, you got to care, you got to be curious, and they all relate to each other. When you have conviction for what you represent and how you can help someone, you're gonna be curious about connecting the dots for them, and then you're gonna really like focus on caring for them as a customer, a potential customer, because you have full conviction. I can help you. Like, I'm curious, can I help Colin? If I connect the dots that I can, and I have full conviction for what I represent, like I'm going to put all my care into you, and I'm going to put my care into my follow-up and my messaging and everything. And so I do think AI can replace the kind of mass blasting, agencying world. And what I've seen a lot of businesses start to do is they're moving away from the kind of generic email templates, and they're putting prompts in their kind of sequences instead. And they're kind of prompting their SDRs of, hey, here's some messaging prompt you should think about at this stage or this step, and other campaigns marketing is sending at this step in the sequence. And when you leave the voicemail from you, this is perhaps like a script of what you should say. Or, hey, send a manual email because you're at this step in the sequence. They've also received these 3 white papers at this point, or we also sent them an ad featuring this at this point, and you can mention that in your email. And so it becomes less of this robotic movement is what I'm seeing orgs evolve to. Less of the templated if-then emails with brackets and more prompting where reps, they have kind of guidelines of what they should follow. So it's still like if you think about sequencing and all that, it's still a workflow, right? It's great to have a process and a workflow. That's how you scale sales. And so it's like, all right, like how can I elevate this workflow beyond the like auto emails and like auto generated stuff? Because that's something AI can do. And if that's all my SDR team is doing is clicking the button, that's replaced. But it's how can I get my team to people that really care, really curious, have conviction, they're really smart and driven for success. Those folks are not being replaced. So
I think it comes down to like, are you using the tool to make you better, or are you using it to make you lazy? Right. And it's like writing my intro to the podcast. Like I could probably go into ChatGPT and just send it like your link to your LinkedIn and be like, write an intro to a podcast. But the downside to that is going to make me lazy. I'm going to get on this call and not really have in my head a solid understanding of who I'm even speaking to. Right. And that's why I like to do it myself, because it means, and that's specifically why I do it the night before the podcast. This is fresh in my head when I get on the episode. Whereas if I do it 2 weeks ago when we schedule, by the time we get on this episode, it's probably faded away. Like I don't remember it so much. And, I like to have that relevance of your career history right inside my head. And it's the same thing when you're writing a sales email or something. Like if your AI is just firing it off for you, you don't even really understand your prospect, right? And if you get to talk to them, it's most certainly not going to be fresh in your head. So I like that idea of using prompts and sort of forcing you to use your brain a bit, right? Rather than just clicking buttons. Yeah.
We're doing these junior sellers, like folks earlier in their career, a disservice if we're completely automating the fundamentals. Like I think you and I, and some of your audience, I'm sure, many of the folks in the audience, like we've got the benefit of having had to research someone, research a company, research the people that work there. And that informed our conviction to even put them in my call list in the first place. If I'm clay loading them into a call list, and I'm a second job out of college SDR, and I'm just kind of calling down it, maybe that will work with like a basic script, maybe, but like you're doing a disservice to that rep, because they're going to be missing just some core fundamentals when they become an AE, especially. And like when you're getting deep with a buyer, they can tell when you're authentic and when you care, and they trust you as someone. They want to be a champion for you. They want to sell for you internally, right? And I guess like the advice there is like, you still got to teach your people the fundamentals of selling and ask them, why are you adding that account and why are you adding that person to your call list? Why are you researching these people? They need to have clear answers to that. Once you move past that, then you can start to automate. Then you can start to automate once you know the ingredients of what good looks like. But even then, like there should be an element of like when you get that person on the phone, there's just a certain element in your tone, in your conviction that you can feel and the buyer feels, and they appreciate and they want to reciprocate the effort you've put in. The thing with complete automation is like that reciprocity is burned. They don't owe you anything because they can tell this is like a bullshit, like a BS pitch. So just, you might be having to do more activity to make up for each of those like non-real connections.
Yeah. It reminds me of a piece of advice I always give to people is like, don't have perfect answers for everything, right? Because I feel like that's the sales breath, right? When you just always, everything is such a perfect answer. I like to try to at least once on a call, give an imperfect answer. And by imperfect, I don't mean I messed up in the way I said it, but I didn't satisfy exactly what they were looking for. They throw out a question or an objection that your average salesperson just has that, oh, we can do that, we can do that, we can do that, we can do that. It's nice to once in a while be like, well, that would be nice, but I don't think it actually does that. Maybe we'll get there someday. Like, I think that makes everything that you said before and after just more easy to trust and believe, right? So that sort of ties into that. So I want to ask you, what is working for you guys at Orum today in terms of outbound, or maybe as a preface to that, if you want to give us a sense of sort of where your pipeline comes from? Are you heavy on inbound? Are you heavy on outbound? You guys do a lot of partnerships. To the extent that you can share, that would be a good sort of baseline for this question.
Yeah. So I've got three distinct buying, selling motions: small, medium, and large. Our small, we call it our SMB, our inside sales market, 100% inbound. Those are sales assisted kind of transactions, if you will. And those are like all internally promoted SDRs. Basically, you go from an SDR to an ISR to learn that closed muscle. And these are people that are coming inbound or doing pricing requests, or they sign up for a free trial and they're coming in hand raising already. And so that buying motion is much more around qualification and triaging, like where they are in the journey. Are they ready to buy now? Are they researching? Are they just kicking the tires? And you kind of put them in these three buckets, and that determines your monthly, quota and priority. Our mid-market
sounds just like air call, by the way. We were pretty much doing the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah. In the SMB market. Yeah. And in that market tends to have less healthy retention metrics as well. Like they kind of come and go as quickly as they come in.
They're startups. Well, sometimes one or two people in a bedroom. Yeah.
You nailed it. And so, tend to be more monthly transactions, or if they're annual, they might not stay after the first year. And so you just have to be comfortable with your kind of retention metrics in that space. And then, we look at the business within the business, right? So our SMB is treated as its own kind of flywheel between demand gen and our sales team. And then our mid-market and enterprise teams would be more of your typical B2B enterprise sales motion, where we've got SDRs focusing, full cycle AEs, partnership contributions, demand gen events. All of that is ABM initiatives. All of that is surrounding our middle market and our large market. So
is enterprise a big piece of the pie for you guys?
It's a growing piece of the pie for us. Yeah. So we really started the business as this kind of, we call it middle out. So we started in the mid-market, kind of upper mid-market. Our first couple of customers were Rubrik pre-IPO, CrowdStrike pre-IPO, Zenefits, kind of the early HR companies, because that's my world. And so we kind of walked into some of those accounts, namely was a customer, Zenefits, Ultimate Software. And so kind of upper mid, small cap, public companies in some cases. And then lately in the past 18 months, we've gone up selling to the Fortune 500, and we've landed some great accounts up there. And so now that buying motion is, you have to evolve your playbook because your pipeline comes from your base. And so now it's like, okay, now I need to evolve some AEs into account managers, where they're keeping their book of business and they're fostering those relationships, and they're getting introductions to new business units, new teams.
Are you only doing that on enterprise, or are you looking to do that in the mid-market as well?
We're in fall planning right now for 25, and we're talking about like the balance there of.
Did you normally just have like AE, CSM, like two separate teams, and now you're thinking maybe bring it together?
Yeah, exactly.
I wanted to do that at Aircall. Yeah.
Yeah.
I saw so much opportunity on the customer success side. I don't say this to insult people, but I say it because I think it's true. CS in SaaS tends to become a secondhand sales team. Again, I don't say that for it to come out the wrong way, but it tends to be people who didn't make it in sales or didn't like the pressure of sales. And so I say secondhand, meaning they kind of wanted to be in sales, but they often weren't really the greatest at it. And so they end up in CS because they're good at talking to people. They're great with customers, all that stuff. But then I'm like, we're putting our biggest piece of the revenue pie in the hands of technically the people who often didn't succeed in sales. And I always found that to be a bit lopsided. And that goes back to growth at all costs. It's like, we just care about new business, new business. And I'm like, why aren't we putting our best salespeople in charge of like some of the retention and being involved? So I always kind of thought like maybe that full cycle, sort of owning your book of business, is actually the answer to that problem. But I never got a chance to test it.
Yeah, it's coming back in vogue. I think that, SaaS is gonna, we're looking at like traditional, if you think about like financial advisors or insurance brokers, it's like when you're first starting out as a rep, you build up your book of business and then you kind of retire in peace. And those are your golden handcuffs. And that's great for retention in the business. If you got a great product that's sticky, the rep is going to stick around for years. And so we're thinking about, how do we evolve that? Definitely an enterprise mid-market. How do we, you want to balance, because we are racing against competition for market share and we don't want the big players to come out with what we do. And so you got to strike that balance.
Fear, people have this fear that, and I'm working with some agencies right now on the consulting side as well. I've sort of broadened my horizons a bit out of SaaS, working with agencies who sell into SaaS. And so I understand the space. But, one of the concerns that they have with the book of business, at least problems they've experienced, is some salespeople just get too comfortable and you have this revenue that is coming in. And so you don't necessarily need to work as hard every month and you can take your foot off the gas. Do you have any concerns with that? Have you run into that yet? Or?
Well, we haven't fully made the pivot, but, I think a simple comp plan idea is like 50, like, let's say, you're on a 50-50 plan, let's say 200K rep, 100K base, the other 100K, if we divide that into 50K, 50K, you could do 50K on your renewal, 50K on expansion ARR. And I don't care if it comes from new logos or your current customers. We'll treat the dollars the same. And this is what I'm proposing for 25
that makes
for my
sense.
mid-market team. And so stay tuned on a follow-up episode. If Colin
sort of a split quota. So you can't really just rely on one thing for the other.
You can't just rely on one. And I think if you hit both, we'll do some big accelerator for you. And let's get you earning.
I like it. I do like it. I think it makes a lot of sense, not just for efficiency of the business, but the customer experience, without question, will be better. There's nothing fun about getting handed off from an SDR to an account executive, to a sales engineer, to an implementation and onboarding specialist, to an account manager, to a CSM. It's like, and then they reassign people on top of that. Right. People lose their jobs and it's a horrible experience. Yeah, generally speaking.
We want to elevate that buying experience and that, if you're passing the baton and if you drop the baton, it's like, you have to make up for that speed now, right? Versus like if we're all pushing it up the field, like in rugby or soccer, it's like, all right, we're all a unified team here. So,
well, you answered the next question, which was going to be, what, if anything, are you doing strategically at Orum to become more efficient? It sounds like that's the big answer, but do you have anything else you want to throw in there?
That's a big one there. I'd say, doubling down on our ecosystem partners and thinking about distribution from that perspective, right? We've never really
that was big for us at Aircall. We made a big push one year. We said we want to have 100 integrations by the end of the year. And we were like, that's insane. Like no one thought we could do it. I mean, we ended up having to use third-party tools and stuff, but it was all because of growth, because we knew every time we opened up a new integration, it created a new pipeline for us. So that was the growth strategy for an entire year. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah. And if you can get partners to help distribute you, even better, right? Or resell you, right? We've never done like a formal resale. So
we tried. It was hard. Yeah.
And so we'll see. So I've got a head of partnerships focused on some initiatives here, and and it may not be 100 integrations. It may be like going deep with like 3 or 4 top partners, right? And going from there. But continuing there, and then pushing our SDR team up market with this enterprise motion, and just kind of inching the line up further and further, and enabling our AEs that do need to be full cycle, like with the right tool stack to be successful as well. So
makes sense. Okay, let's shift gears here a little bit, and I want to get your take on sort of due diligence, right? You're shopping for a company, you want to get a job, you've had some good track record here in picking the right companies. Do you have a strategy there? Are there specific things you're looking for? Are you just going on gut instinct? Is it something most important to you? Like, are you really focused on the relationship with the founder, the quality of the product? How do you think about that?
So how do you choose, how do I think about choosing these companies, right? And some of it I think is from like, well, with namely, I knew I wanted to work in Silicon Alley. It was called in New York City. And there's a whole story I could get into around how I got to New York. I'm from LA originally, California, and Santa Barbara. Chasing love, that love is now my wife.
Congrats. Oh, it worked out. Good.
It worked out. And I
Good.
knew I wanted to work in New York. And in my head, I'd always pictured New York as like boiler room, like cold call energy. I wanted
It
that.
was when I started there. For sure it
Yes.
was. Yeah.
Yes. So I went looking for that and I interviewed at like Yext and ZocDoc
Me too. Me too.
and
Both of them.
that's awesome, man.
And Yelp.
And Yelp, yeah, all these like
Yeah.
shops. And I remember walking into Namely and it was like,
You might have interviewed at Single Platform if you were shopping companies back
I
then.
remember seeing that company. I probably
Yeah.
did.
Yeah.
I took a lot of calls and I just walked into Namely and the buzz of the sales floor was like, oh my gosh. And the CEO is making cold calls next to the SDRs. And I was
Oh,
like,
I love it.
okay, this is where I want to be. And, and I think with Orum, it was really, you got to look at the people, you got to look at the technology, you got to look at the market opportunity, right? And I've only done early stage. I think like if I was to do like a scale up, I'd look at, Magic Quadrant, like who are the top players in whatever space. Like I'd be a little more logical about it. I've definitely used much more emotion to make some of these decisions. But
Yeah.
I look
Well,
at
maybe
the
that's a good
founder.
thing. Maybe that served you well, it seems.
Yeah, it served me well for sure. And I think like if I were to go and look again, it might be like, okay, like, which markets are heating up, which are the top players in those markets. And, it depends what your goals are, right? Like you want to go maximize income, you want to maximize learning, you want to maximize learning and income, then you got to think about who you'd be working for, the product, the people, speak with the reps, like definitely talk to the actual salespeople on the ground floor, talk to the customers if you can, talk to users of the customers, not just the champions. The more you can reduce your uncertainty, the better in my experience. So that'd be my advice there.
Okay, so the last question here, it was really advice for young salespeople. And if you have some broad advice, you can give that. But I also want to make a bit more of a specific question here, if I can add on to that, because, both of us didn't start directly in B2B SaaS. And I have said for a long time that I attribute a lot of my success and being able to elevate so quickly in my career to the fact that I did spend 4 years working at CVS, learning a big corporation, being trained on all the layers of management, learning how to hire, to fire, to schedule, inventory management, just all this vast amount of knowledge. And like, as I was writing the intro and reading through, your history last night, even though it's different, right? You're doing event management, but I'm reading through the different things you did. It's like a very wide range of responsibility, and it's probably overwhelming. It's probably a lot that you had to sort of figure out how to do. Same as trying to keep 30,000 shelves full with all these little products at CVS and keep the customers happy and hit the sales targets and all this stuff. And so, I attribute a lot of my success to that because it was the hardest 4 years of my life in terms of work. I put in the most hours for sure. I was like 70, 80 hours a week in that job. And, I learned so much and all this sort of stuff, but I knew I didn't want to do it for the rest of my life because it was so much work and the reward just wasn't big enough. If the money was bigger, I would have probably stayed the course. Like if I can make 3 to 500K running a CVS store or a chain of them, sure. But I looked at the guys above me who were in charge of 25 stores, and even they weren't making that much money. And so I lost interest in that regard, but I ended up not regretting having that experience because when I did find my way to New York and I went through all the interviews at Yext and Single Platform and, ZocDoc and Yelp and stuff, I had very similar experience. I walked into the office at Single Platform and I was like a kid in a candy store, the energy, I went into the bathroom right before my interview and I look up next to me at the urinal next to me is the CEO with his backwards hat on. And I'm like, oh no, that's him. Like, and I was all nervous and he's just, hey, what's up, man? Like, it was just, and I was just like, this is so cool. Like, I can't believe people are making money here and all this stuff. But anyway, I asked that because when I got into the role, what really stood out to me was that I just seemed to take it a bit more serious than the other 16 people who got hired with me. And I think it was because I was 4 years out of school. I had this other job. Meanwhile, all of them just graduated school like a month ago because I joined in August. And so it was like, people were just coming in. Do you attribute a lot of your early success and being able to grow so quickly to the fact that you did not just start in an SDR role straight out of college? And I asked that because I think it ties in because I kind of wonder, this is a multi-part sort of question here and you can run in any direction you want with it. But I sort of wonder if we're doing a disservice to people coming in to an SDR role straight, out of college. Is it just too narrow? Are they just not learning enough? And then they're sort of like 2 or 3 years into their career and they haven't really done much, other than like a few very specific tasks. So I want to get your thoughts on that in any direction you want to go with that. It was a long preamble, but take it away.
Oh, Colin, no, I appreciate it. I think we may be doing a disservice, especially if you're a remote team. like I think not having some sort of business experience in an office or in a company, if it's not in a formal office, like where, to your point, you start to get exposure to different parts of the business and different people and navigating conflict and customer service and stocking shelves or parking cars or, designing the layout of an event space
and you
like
start speaking differently.
Yes.
I actually think that's when you elevate your language from kid to adult. That's when the words like mad or wicked sort of work their way out of your vocabulary because you're around older people for the first time for many hours of the day. I've noticed my vocabulary, it just matures over time. And I'm not seeing that happen with some of these remote folks. And these things are starting to stand out to me.
Yeah. I do think we've created, I guess the word's like a deluge or deficit, like this kind of like, there's going to be a steeper learning curve. People are not at the level that maybe you or I were. And I think the pandemic certainly impacted this and remote work. And so if you're like early in your career, like how can you make up some of the skill gap that is widening between you and those that have had other work experience, other real world applications? So like you got to think about how you can upskill and expose yourself to other executives and other conversations. And so you're going to have to somehow make it up. You're going to have to put the time in and do it and take courses or somehow get exposure there. So to answer your question, yes, definitely. Like I attribute my time in the event space and doing valet parking and working at hotels. And
I did valet too on Staten Island, man.
I love it.
It was great. It was so much fun, man.
You're my Colin cousin here.
I know. We really are like kindred spirits, man. Yeah, I did valet.
You're a 2L guy, but it's all good, man. It's all good.
You broke the stigma for me. I used to just see the 1L and I'm like, oh, really?
That's awesome.
Now I'm getting past that.
Good stuff.
Awesome, man. Well, thank you so much for joining me. Where can people follow you? I know you're on LinkedIn. If you're not already following Colin Specter on LinkedIn, do that. I tried to find you on Twitter. Are you on there?
My Twitter, I usually post like inspirational quotes. So if you like inspirational quotes, you can follow me on Twitter. And I think it's just at Colin Specter, all one word. It should be.
And I'll drop it in the show notes below. So if anyone wants to follow you on Twitter, they can do that there as well.
That sounds great. But
are you guys hiring? Anything you want to promote here?
I'm hiring a couple enterprise sellers right now. So I'm also hiring our founding sales people in the UK. So I'm looking for 2 AEs in the UK. We'll support you with field marketing and some SDR support as well. So
and that's at Orum.com. They'll find those job listings.
Yeah. ORUM as in mother.com. That's right.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining me. This was great. We'll have to catch up again soon sometime.
Sounds great, Colin. Thanks so much. And thank you everyone for listening in. Have a great day.
Likewise. You too.